you. Good morning, everybody. Awesome. Thank you, Principal Tucci and Mr. Zizzo, and thank you to the club members for inviting us here this morning. My name is Amanda.
My name is Carolyn.
And we're both graduate students down the street at Tufts University, and we also work at the Office of Energy and Environment for the City of Medford on what's called climate resilience. And we came here today to invite all of you to become climate heroes. Now, over the next half hour, we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you, but we also encourage your participation. There'll be a few opportunities to raise your hand, and we can't wait to hear about all of the great ideas that you have. Great. So there's 3 things that we're going to cover today. These are the things that we want you to remember if you remember nothing else. The first is that climate change is affecting Medford, and it's going to continue affecting us into the future. However, what we do today, the actions that all of us here are taking now, are going to determine exactly how it ends up affecting us in the future. Thirdly, every single person in this room has the opportunity to take action. You as individuals, with your families, as a community, and as part of a global community, we all have the opportunity to take action to prevent a lot of the worst possible effects of climate change.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda, for getting us started. So first, what is climate change? We heard a little bit about it from some of the club members here today, and I'm sure some of you may have learned about it in some of your classes, but for the sake of our presentation this morning, we just wanted to make sure that we're all working with the same information and that we're all on the same page. So we have a quick YouTube video that covers a lot of the basics that we thought it was important for you guys to know this morning. Thank you, whoever did that.
To understand climate change, think of the game Tetris. For eons, Earth has played a version of this game with blocks of carbon. They enter the atmosphere as carbon dioxide gas from volcanoes, decaying plant matter, breathing creatures, and the surface of the sea. And they leave the atmosphere when they're used by plants during photosynthesis, absorbed back into the ocean, or stored in soil and sediment. This game of Tetris is called the carbon cycle, and it's the engine of life on Earth. What's the connection to climate? Well, when that carbon dioxide is in the air waiting to be reabsorbed, it traps a portion of the sun's heat which would otherwise escape to space. That's why carbon dioxide is called a greenhouse gas. It creates a blanket of warmth known as the greenhouse effect that keeps our Earth from freezing like Mars. The more carbon dioxide blocks hang out in the atmosphere waiting to be cleared, the warmer Earth becomes. Though the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has varied through ice ages and asteroid impacts, over the past 8,000 years, the stable climate we know took shape, allowing human civilization to thrive. But about 200 years ago, we began digging up that old carbon that had been stored in the soil. These fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, are made from the buried remains of plants and animals that died long before humans evolved. The energy stored inside them was able to power our factories, cars, and power plants. But burning these fuels also injected new carbon blocks into Earth's Tetris game. At the same time, we cleared forests for agriculture, reducing the Earth's ability to remove the blocks. And since 1750, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has increased by 40% and shows no sign of slowing. Just like in Tetris, the more blocks pile up, the harder it becomes to restore stability. The extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere accelerates the greenhouse effect by trapping more heat near the surface and causing polar ice caps to melt. And the more they melt, the less sunlight they're able to reflect, making the oceans warm even faster. Sea levels rise, coastal populations are threatened with flooding, natural ecosystems are disrupted, and the weather becomes more extreme over time. Climate change may affect different people and places in different ways, but ultimately it's a game that we're all stuck playing. And unlike in Tetris, we won't get a chance to start over and try again.
So as the video said, and as the club leaders mentioned, all of this carbon in the atmosphere is coming from humans, from the fossil fuels that we burn, from the cars that we drive, the energy that we use, and the forests that we cut down. And it's making the atmosphere a lot warmer. All of that affects us right here in Medford, and it is already starting to affect us. And it's causing certain vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are the weaknesses that we have as a community that we're worried about how can we overcome them. And so we've been addressing, or as a city, we've created a municipal climate vulnerability assessment that Carolyn and I and a lot of other people have been a part of to identify what are those weak points that we have in Medford and understand them so that we can overcome them.
So the first vulnerability that I wanted to talk to you about is that it's getting hotter, which that's in, we used to call it global warming, the atmosphere is warming, it makes sense that it might be getting hotter. But we can actually study how much hotter it is getting right here in Medford. So I hope you recognize this map. This is your city, this is Medford. And this was a map that was made from data from 2015. So the red areas represent land surface temperature that's over 100 degrees. So when we're talking about land surface temperature, we're not talking about the temperature that you see on the weather report, that's the air temperature. We are talking about when it's really hot out and the sun's out and you put your hand on the ground or you try to walk on the pavement in bare feet, we're talking about that temperature. So we can tell from the red areas where it's hottest in Medford. The orangey yellow are areas that were above 90 degrees. And then we have, it's kind of hard to see with this projection, but you can see up near the blue, which is the bodies of water, our lakes and ponds. That's less red, the area around that, which shows that there's a cooling effect of the water and the plants that are around the water. So this map, I think, is really, really interesting. It doesn't mean that in the future Massachusetts is going to fly down and suddenly become South Carolina, but what it does mean is that in the future, and we're talking, 2070, 2099, you guys will all be, I don't know, grandparents' age, perhaps, but we are going to be experiencing weather like they have in South Carolina. Now, I know that might sound kind of nice to us right now in the spring, where we really want it to be warm outside. I once tried to teach climate change to 4-year-olds, and the takeaway that they had was that it will be summer vacation all the time. And that's not really what I meant to tell them. But because think about what temperature South Carolina is going to be. It's going to be very, very hot. And how is that going to impact the people there? How is that going to impact the food that they grow there? How is that going to impact how much electricity that they use and electricity that we use, as we need more to cool ourselves down? So it's kind of a big deal. And this calendar just demonstrates that in the future we're going to be seeing a lot more days over 90 degrees. So that's a lot more heat waves that we experience in the summer. There's going to be a whole lot more of them.
Another vulnerability that we found is that in Medford, it's getting rainier. If you ask your parents, and I know since Carolyn and I were kids around here, it's gotten a lot rainier than it used to be. This is not true in other parts of the US. In California, for example, there's a lot more drought. In the Amazon jungle, there's a lot more drought, which is really concerning. But around here, it's rainier. The atmosphere, as it's getting warmer from all of the carbon dioxide, it's able to retain more water vapor. And then as that water vapor condenses into clouds, it then drops a lot more rain all at one time. So we're seeing a lot more rain, and then we're going to be seeing longer periods of drought in between. Also, this can include major storms like nor'easters and hurricane patterns that we're part of. So this is a map of current flood areas in the city that some expert engineers made with some interns at the city of Medford. And we know that all of that rain the soil can only soak up so much of it. So in the fells, the trees and the animals are really affected, and the types of trees that can grow in the city. Also, our buildings get damaged as basements flood at your house, maybe. A lot of streets become flooded. These are actual photos from just the last few years where we've started seeing more streets in Medford flooding than they have in the past. And that means people can't get to school, they can't get to work. It really disrupts a lot of activity, and people's cars get damaged. So this is something that we're going to continue seeing.
Awesome. So the next thing that we wanted to talk about is that it's getting riverier. I made up the word to fit with the theme. It's getting hotter, it's getting rainier, it's getting riverier. So all those storms that Amanda was talking about, the increase of rain, that's going to make a difference for the Mystic River, which flows right through our city. Another thing that's going to impact the Mystic River are a few terms that you may have heard of. Where's the other one? Sea level rise being one of them. So this is a term thrown around a lot in conversations about climate change. And what it means is that our oceans the levels are getting higher because, one, it's getting warmer, and when water gets warmer, you might remember from science class, the molecules start moving around a little faster and they start to spread apart more. And I know we're talking about molecules, but we're also talking about the entire ocean. So that just means that it's going to take up a lot more space. In addition, the ice caps are melting, which is something that, again, you hear about in the news. So that's also adding more water to our oceans. So how does that affect us? Medford's not on the beach, but we do have the Mystic River, which used to be a tidal river. So that means that there would be a low tide and a high tide, just like when you go to the beach. But in the 1960s, we installed the Amelia Earhart Dam, which is in that photo above, which you can see today if you go to Assembly Row in Somerville, or if you go to Costco in Everett, you might be able to see it. And that separates the Mystic River from the rest of the ocean, from Boston Harbor. But if the ocean levels rise too much, it could still impact our river and cause a lot more flooding. So this map here, the areas of purple are the probability of that space flooding in 2070. So again, we're still talking about the future, but you can see that really a lot of Medford, particularly South Medford and the Wellington area, will experience a lot of river flooding.
So we want to ask you, now that we've talked a little bit about some of our main vulnerabilities here in Medford, increased heat, increased rain, and future sea level rise and storm surge, what are some ideas that you guys have for how these different vulnerabilities can affect different groups, different populations here in the city? So I want to ask, and raise your hand if you have an answer, and I'll try to spread out who we call. But how do you think these different vulnerabilities will affect the plants and animals living in the Middlesex Fells? Yes?
They might die run water, and it might be hard for them to live due to this heat, which might cause them to die from stroke.
Yep.
And it will just be pretty to look at how we're all animals.
Yeah, you're right. So definitely the increased heat affects the types of plants and animals that can live there, and it can cause them a lot of stress to all of them. What about your grandparents that live in Medford? Seriously, if your grandparents, the video mentioned that different groups of people are affected. Different groups of people experience climate change differently, and we're not all affected in the same ways. So elderly people might have special vulnerabilities. Anybody have any ideas? Yes, sir. Yeah, definitely. It can affect your health if you already have health issues. He was saying that it can give you heart problems, respiratory issues in your lungs. So definitely. What about little kids? How are your little brothers and sisters affected? Yeah. Can you say it louder? No, give it a try. That they won't be able to get to school, did you say? Yeah, it can be harder for parents to, if it's that much harder to get kids to daycare and to preschool if it's really hot out, for sure. They might be able to not walk. What about people who take the bus and who are walking? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That flooding is a big deal. It's really a pain. I can't get on my bike when it's pouring rain out. Finally, what about you? How do you think you'll be affected? Let's get somebody new. Yes. Sure. That's exactly right. A lot of the foods that we like to eat, chocolate, vanilla, sugar, a lot of them are grown in tropical regions, and it's going to be a lot harder to grow them in the future because it'll get too hot and dry in some places to grow them. So definitely our food supply will be affected in the future. Cool. Thank you, everybody.
It's getting late. All right, so on to our second point. If you remember, we had 3 things that we wanted you to remember from this morning. Our second point is that what we do now is going to impact how climate change will affect Medford now and in the future. So I wanted to point out that we've shown you a lot of maps so far this morning, and that these maps are what we call projections. So that means that scientists have done a lot of really in-depth research, collected a lot of data, and these projections are their absolute best estimates as to what the future might look like. But we still don't know exactly because we can't tell the future. We can just use the information that we have now to make that prediction, to make that projection. So, you know, it might happen sooner, it might happen later, it might be more extreme, it might be less extreme, but it's still happening, it's definitely happening, and so we still need to take actions to address these problems.
So when we talk about the actions that we're taking right here in Medford today, they fall into 2 main buckets. There's mitigation and adaptation. These are 2 great words that you can take home to your families. Mitigation are the kinds of activities we're doing to reduce the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere. Our goal is to get to 0. So in other words, putting as much carbon into the atmosphere as we're taking out by 2050. That's the global goal, and Medford is part of it. Adaptation is what are the things that we're doing to live with and deal with the effects of climate change that we're already seeing. So how can we live with more water and rising seas? Where will people live in the future? How can we live with increased heat to make sure that everybody stays safe? And Carolyn and I are part of our adaptation planning as a city of Medford because even though 2070 is really far away, it takes a lot of time and resources to put programs and buildings in place that are going to be there for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, so here in Medford, we're actually working on many different levels to think about mitigation and adaptation. So we're thinking on an international, global scale. We're also thinking on a national scale, so how we interact with the rest of the United States, as well as on a local scale. So what are we doing right here for our community? Our mayor, Mayor Burke, is part of the Global Covenant of Mayors. So this is a group of mayors from all around the world who are realizing that they need to take mitigation and adaptation steps in their own city. We're also part of the We Are Still In Coalition, which is a group of city and state leaders from throughout the United States who have committed through something called the Paris Agreement, which was created by the United Nations in 2015. So our city and other cities have said, we still believe in that. We still recognize that climate change is a huge global problem and we want to help make a difference here in America. And here at a local level, you might recognize this. we are doing, this is a good example of mitigation. So there's the wind turbine that's right outside our school, and it's creating electricity from wind to help power your schools. So that means that we don't have to use fossil fuel energy, so energy that's burning carbon dioxide and putting all these other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to get our energy. We are also currently planning both for a new police station, which is on the top, and a new library, which is on the bottom. And in making plans for these buildings, our department has helped make some recommendations for how these buildings can both mitigate our impact and adapt. So the police station and the library are both going to be using a lot of clean energy, and the police station is even built so that it makes room. It's by the river, so it will make room in case the river floods, so that nothing severe will get damaged in that building.
Now we want to ask, now that we've talked a little bit about some mitigation and adaptation, can somebody give me an example of another action that you can take to mitigate climate change, so to use less carbon? Yes. Yeah, you got it. Use solar power instead of fossil fuels. Solar, wind, the new offshore wind in Massachusetts, that all goes a long way. What about adaptation? What's another adaptation action that we can take? How can we deal with more water? Who was the, do we have anybody? Oh yeah, go for it.
So you know how a heart attack. So how we use the heat that we're making
Yeah, definitely. That's great. We can use use extra heat. Like actually the eggs out on Deer Island, those are take the methane from all of the waste we put in the toilet, and that actually becomes energy. One more? Yeah. Definitely, yeah, I put some clues up here. In certain areas, actually in Salisbury, if you've been up to the beach, they're building a lot of houses on stilts now, if you want to build on the ocean. I want to also give a shout out to tree planting. Trees are, so some things are adaptation and mitigation at the same time. Planting trees and keeping trees in your backyard that already exist are a great example of that, because trees actually suck up carbon and they put it into the ground, and they make oxygen, and they give us shade, and they help retain more water in the soil when they're forests. So that's an easy and cheap thing that you can do, plant trees.
Yes, we have a hand up right here. Yeah, so that's called geothermal energy. That's something that they do a lot like in Iceland, because there's a lot of geothermal energy available closer to the ground. Awesome. All right, so our final point is that there is a lot you can do about climate change. So that's what we're gonna think about in our last slide is, again, how can we all be climate heroes? I got this one, yep. So this is a quick, I know we're running a little bit short on time, but we just wanted to give some examples of how things that you may already be doing in your daily life still count as mitigation and adaptation activities. So if you have ever turned off a light because you're leaving the room, raise your hand. Awesome. If you have ever walked somewhere instead of driving or ridden your bike, raise your hand. Awesome. If you have ever chosen to read a newspaper article or something on the internet about climate change or anything related to the environment. Awesome. A little bit less hands, but that's okay. That's okay. Hopefully we'll inspire you to do some more of that. Have any of you ever called your elected officials or sent an email to someone in the federal government or state or local? Got a few hands. Awesome. Awesome. That's hard to do. A lot of adults don't do that. That's something we need to do more of.
Cool. So anybody who raised their hand, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other stuff that we didn't say, but anybody who raised their hand has already taken a climate action. And we're going to take it up a notch, and we want you to become climate heroes. Now, if you think that you're too young, or you don't know, oh, I don't know enough about climate change, or oh, this is going on out in the world, I want to say, no, it's not true. There are a lot of young people from here in Medford to all around the world who are already taking climate action and being climate heroes. On the left, there's a picture of 16-year-old Greta Thunberg. She's from Sweden, and she, by herself, has started the Youth Climate Strike. There have been protests all... Yeah, give it a clap, yeah. All right. So the youth... It sounds like some folks here have already heard about this. So young people, high school, college, even middle school students have been walking out, talking to their elected officials, going to their nation's capitals and saying that adults, you need to take political action to prevent climate change. Then on the right, you can see the Sunrise Movement. This is started by a group of college students here in the Northeast. It's a national organization in the US, and they've proposed something called the Green New Deal that combines jobs and environment and stopping climate change. And they've actually gotten presidential candidates to be talking about this. They've gotten members of Congress to be talking about it. They even got the New York state legislature to pass this policy, and it all started with young people. Yeah. And that's called the Sunrise Movement. And in the middle is right here, you might recognize Mayor Burke, and there's a high school student from Medford High School. A year ago, the students got together and they said, we want a plastic bag ban here in Medford because plastic is actually made using petroleum, using fossil fuels. It ends up in the water, it kills a lot of animals, and we just don't need it a lot of the time. So think about the plastic that you use on a daily basis. These guys got the city to pass an ordinance that will go into effect this summer to stop using plastic bags. Really cool. Really cool.
So that could all be you guys. This is all something, we have our environmental club here, which is great. At the high school, there's more environmental clubs, more opportunities for you guys to take some action right now. Oops.
Hi. Thank you.
But we wanted to also give you guys some ideas of how in the future, whatever you pick to do for your career, climate change is so interdisciplinary, it covers so many different topics that chances are whatever it is that you want to do, you could somehow help with mitigation or adaptation to climate change. So maybe you want to go to college to become a lawyer. Maybe you want to study a trade to get into plumbing or become an electrician. All of those things relate to climate change. So maybe you're into food and agriculture. Maybe you can help us figure out how to make more drought-resistant crops. Maybe you're into business and you can help us develop some more sustainable, more green business practices. Maybe you are into journalism. You could become a reporter that writes about these issues and helps educate others. Or maybe you also want to be a teacher and you want to teach the next generation about how to be more responsible stewards of our environment. All right.
So lastly, the most important step, and I think Principal Tucci pointed this out at the beginning, is we have to get educated first. We have to be informed about what's going on in the world around us. So we wanted to include some great resources. A lot of you are really good at programming, do a lot of stuff with data. Check out these resources from NASA and NOAA, which are federal agencies. They have a lot of really great data and maps that you can play around with to understand more deeply what climate change really looks like around the world. Also check out our website, Go Green Medford, to find out more about all of the programs going on here in the city. And as I mentioned to the club leaders, if you have any great ideas, you can actually share them with Alicia. And then finally, find out more about what's going on here in the greater Boston area with the Greenovate program in Boston, and this cool mapping tool that we put on here. So we're going to be sending this presentation to your teachers. So we hope that you get informed, take action, and join us as climate heroes. Thank you, everybody.